Hello, welcome. I'm Beth Cougler Blom, and this is Facilitating on Purpose. I'm so glad you're here. My guest today is Chanchal Garg. Chanchal is a speaker, an author, an executive coach, and she's also a conscious leadership facilitator. And that's what she and I are going to be talking about today. We talk about what it means to be a conscious leader and how facilitators can show up as conscious facilitators in our work. We talk about truth telling, we talk about healing, we talk about authenticity, vulnerability. I loved this conversation with Chanchal. It is a special one, especially if you really care about bringing your whole self to your work. Please join Chanchal Garg and I in this conversation. I hope you enjoy the show. It's so wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for coming and having this conversation with me today, Chanchal.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Beth.
I'm going to ask you a big question to get started. Just thinking about our topic that we're going to be talking about facilitators as conscious leaders and kind of all sorts of things within that topic. Who would you say you are as a person, or maybe as a conscious person? You know, it's a big question, but where does your mind go to kind of describe yourself as a conscious person?
The first words that came up as you asked me that question was truth teller. Whether it's in my personal life or in a leadership setting, my attention tends to go to what's not being said or what's the truth here that we're sort of dancing around and bringing that to light, because usually there's a lot of unlock, I think, in just that.
Yeah. Is that something that you came to over time, or have you always been that truth teller in your own life?
I don't know that I've always been that. I think it started with just seeing things that I'm like, why is nobody saying that? Like I think even as a child, I would ask myself those questions. And, I think oftentimes as children, we get shut down, at least from our generation, get shut down when you're sort of naming a truth that people don't want to hear. And so I don't think I always named it, but I definitely saw it. I definitely asked myself those questions. And as I started entering into the workforce, it came slowly at first. And over time, I've started to see the impact of being able to do that. And I've gotten to the point now in my career where it doesn't feel good to not do that.
You've turned a corner somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least for me, I got to a point where it's like, if I can't be in alignment, and that word is to me a little cliche and overused, but you know what I mean? If I can't be true to who I am or what I believe or what I'm seeing, then what am I really doing? Right. In terms of my career, it's really important for me to have a purpose and to be contributing to my own values in that way.
Yeah. Maybe that's hopeful for some of the younger people out there who may be listening to say, I don't know, we grow in that ability over time. I know I have for sure that I would be more honest about things in my personal life, in my work life now than I would have been maybe in my 20s. And it grew over time. Was that the same for you?
It's interesting. I was just facilitating a session yesterday in my kids' school for the high school students. It was a whole session on resilience, and we were talking about Paul Gilbert's three systems, right? Like the drive, the threat system, and the soothing system. And I think when I hear that, yes, I do think it comes more online as we age, but I think part of the reason for that is because our soothing system, the part of us that can rest and digest, is so underdeveloped. We're so focused on threat and drive. And it makes it so that even when we're aware, like of this idea of a growth mindset where, mistakes are good, they contribute to our own growth. We can't make them without entering into a threat system, right? We all know that mistakes are good, but how many of us actually feel emotionally safe to make them? And so to be able to speak the truth in a room where other people might not be willing to hear it, or other people might be quick to tell you you're wrong, requires that inner safety. And so I think developing that soothing system is what makes that shift. And I think over time, as we age, because we do slow down, because we have to pay more attention to our bodies, we're forced to develop that part of ourselves. And so I think that's why it becomes easier with more education and information. I think the younger generation can develop it earlier. It's actually my hope that they do.
That's where my brain was going too, that like my daughter's generation, the late high school generation, they're getting the messages, hopefully, that we didn't get at that
Yeah.
time. And so some of these messages, yeah, coming to them a little bit earlier, but they need them too, because
Yeah.
they have a whole different growing up kind of time than we did too.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit about you and your work now. I mean, again, we like can't, there's so much. I mean, there's so many years of experience, but what are you most passionate about doing right now? And maybe just a little bit about how you got there.
I would say right now, my passion is in working with women to do exactly what we just said, to become truth tellers, whether it's in a professional environment, a personal environment, wherever that is. I have been a facilitator for over 8 years for the Stanford Graduate School of Business. I facilitate interpersonal dynamics learning lab groups called T groups, where people are practicing real time. They're getting real time feedback from the rest of the group. It's actually a thrilling experience. It can be a little bit scary at times as well, but there's just so much learning that comes out from that experiential aspect, as you know, right? And so I love doing that work. I'm really excited to bring that into my own personal practice and start leading those groups on my own, sort of my own curation. For the longest time, I grew up in a family that sort of disregarded feelings, right? And I'm a person who is a very deep feeler. And so when I found that work, it was like I found home, and it was like, oh my gosh, there's actually permission to feel, and not only permission to feel, but like actually talk about it. That's incredible. And then we can find ways to relate to each other and find ways to not just sort of spew these feelings, but to gain wisdom from them and allow that to inform our leadership. And so that's what really drew me into that work. And then, sort of coupled with that, as you know, I just released my memoir this year, and it's sort of my journey through spiritual and sexual abuse. And the reason why I wrote that book was not necessarily to focus on the type of abuse that I experienced, but really to look at how do we overcome these narratives that we were raised with so that we can become the leaders that we were meant to be or that we are capable of being. I really believe that leadership is such a personal thing. And part of the reason for that is because our lineage informs how we define leadership in many ways.
Sure.
I know
Yeah.
so many women, I won't say all, but so many women who walk into that room, an executive room, and all of a sudden they find themselves dealing with like these narratives from their childhood. And they're like, what is happening? Why is this showing up? So it's really going all the way back there to say, okay, maybe it served me then, it's not serving me now, and questioning and unlearning and relearning. So that's why I published that narrative or that memoir. My hope now in my work is to sort of integrate those lessons into leadership, into my facilitation work. And those narratives, I'm calling it the inheritance of daughterhood, right? In terms of how it
Yeah.
relates to leadership today.
Yeah. And you've had your own story, your own narratives, and somebody could be listening to this and they've had a different
Mhm.
path, but they still may be kind of dealing with something, or many things that they're bringing with them from their past, where whatever that was. Like there's so many different things that we could be carrying with us.
Absolutely. And I mean, we all carry different things. When I published the book, I wasn't expecting to get messages from people outside of the South Asian diaspora. And I was so surprised that some of my first messages were from these women who are like, my descendants are like from the Irish Catholic Church, right? And so they're like, just there's been so much resonance across the board. While my experience is very specific and probably pretty extreme, the underlying narratives are pretty universal.
Yeah, yeah. No matter what culture or religion or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, all
Exactly.
the different ways we can be diverse from each other. Yeah, I listened to a podcast where there's a woman from her ancestors are from Greece, and there's a lot of stuff about Greek, like they do this, they don't do that. And we would do it, you replace it with another culture and you'd be saying some of the same things, wouldn't you? When you facilitate your tea groups, and I've never been part of a tea group, I mean, it sounds really wonderful, but also maybe hard to get used to that kind of thing that you do as a facilitator in a tea group. Do you use the term conscious leadership? What do you say about what you're trying to do with them?
So we don't give a lot of sort of definitions in that work. Honestly, in that work, I'm just like, I'm a tea group facilitator. And part of being a T group facilitator is that, yes, you're there as a facilitator, but you're also there as a member of the group. And so you're sort of straddling this very fine line, very aware of the power dynamic that's in the room, trying to name that while also trying to not amplify it in many ways. So it's a tricky balance. Conscious leadership, like, as you said, when we started, you're like, I'm not really sure what you do. And I'm like, the thing that I think myself is so that, yeah, I'm like, I'm not really sure that I know either. And so I think as I thought about like all of the work that I do, conscious leadership is the term that sort of stuck, because I think that's the through line through all of the work that I do is how do we do whatever we're doing in the world with more consciousness.
Yeah. And it's showing up for me in different ways. Like, yeah, as before we turned on recording, I was saying, okay, this is going to be new for me too. Like, full disclosure for everyone listening. I don't tend to think of the terms conscious leadership or facilitating as a conscious leader. But it's coming up for me in other ways. Conscious editing has come up for me, conscious language, I believe, like there's certain other folks like newsletters I read, and it's coming forward in various ways, this term conscious, applying it to all sorts of different types of work or aspects of our lives, right? Yeah.
And I think it's necessary at this point because there's so much being thrown at us in terms of stimulus that it's very easy to go on autopilot and be unconscious. And so to be conscious, I think takes just so much intention.
So tell me what it means to you. If I said, Chanchal, what does it mean to you to be a conscious leader in your life or in your work? What does it say to you, that term?
So for me, it means that I'm slowing down and being very aware of the choices and decisions and behaviors that I'm choosing to engage in. As we talked about before, I think there's all these narratives that all of us have around what leadership means. You're the boss. You're not supposed to express your emotions, or you're supposed to put on a happy face all the time, whatever it is, right? Like those are just some of mine and some of the ones that I've heard, but I'm sure everybody has their own. But recognizing that, like, why do you think that way? Asking yourself those questions to say, how can I show up as the best leader possible? Or how can I show up as the leader that whatever this thing that I'm leading is needs? And so that's what I mean by conscious leadership. It's being intentional about your own leadership.
Yeah. And so let's think of it in the context of facilitation. Are there things that you would say to yourself, tell yourself as you were preparing to facilitate? Does it show up for you in the room in certain ways? How do you bring this into your teaching and facilitation work?
So there's a lot of different ways. I think, T group facilitation, as I mentioned, is very different from some of the other work that I do. Some of the ways that I would bring it into that work in particular is to remember that I am there as a facilitator, but the group has its own intelligence. Again, it's that fine line of being effective and trusting the group to do what it needs to do. Recognizing my own self-talk narratives, whatever you want to call it, around what it takes to facilitate, what it takes to be a leader, and also what it means to show up in certain ways, in the ways that we're asking the participants to show up. So for instance, in T group, we're really encouraging a lot of risk taking. We're encouraging a lot of vulnerability. And there have been times as a facilitator of T group where I will come in, and one of our roles as a facilitator is to model the skills and behaviors that we're hoping to see in the group.
That's what we all try to do. It's the hardest thing possible to model these things we're asking the group to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're trying to do that in a way while still maintaining some level of influence. As I go in as a facilitator, I have to modulate my vulnerability at the beginning to make sure that I'm modeling the skills just enough based on what the group can hold on where they are at that moment, again, without losing my influence. And so I remember just a couple months ago facilitating a group, and on day one, we had an interaction in the group where a lot of my vulnerability came out. And I don't think it was inappropriate, but it was a lot. My first fear was like, I just lost all of my credibility with the group.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have been more wrong. As a facilitator of that work, checking yourself, realizing that we have assumptions that we're operating on, knowing that we can check with the group. Sometimes it feels silly to ask the most obvious questions, And the most obvious questions usually carry the biggest unlock. That's one of the things in that sort of work. I think in other facilitation work, if I'm facilitating a workshop or something like that, it's really recognizing like, again, you can have your own outline, you can have your own plan as to how you want this to go with your exercises, with all of that. And again, the group that you're working with has its own intelligence. And you've got to be ready and willing to go in the direction that you need to go in rather than sticking with your plan. And I think as a facilitator, that's probably one of the most challenging aspects, I think, because you have to be willing to lose control at some point, knowing that there are systems and tools that you can use to make sure that the guardrails are still up.
Yeah, I like the way you phrased it, that there's still some level of influence you kind of have to have. I mean, you're the one who's been tasked, however you were tasked, to lead this thing. But then it can't be all about what you want or what we want as the facility. Yeah, the group. And of course, they outnumber us, but they also tend to know a lot more than we do, especially if like a group process facilitation, they all work together or they're all part of the same field or, we're kind of coming in for the day. I mean, we can't really presume to know more than the group sometimes, can we? Like,
Exactly.
we just have to let go. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why I think as a facilitator also, like we have to be very, very aware of power and what it means in a room and who carries it and how do you carry it and how do you do it, again, consciously, so that you're allowing the group to do the work that it needs to do while still holding a little bit of the rein.
Yeah. Let's go back to the piece that you were worried about sharing, the piece where you thought you were maybe being too vulnerable, but then you weren't. I mean, how did you still questioned yourself in that moment. How do you think you can share so that all of us at any part of our journey, what is it that you do to try to find that balance of just enough, but not too much? Or is it just a constant thing that you're trying to find with every group you work with?
Yeah, I think it is a constant thing. I don't know that I've landed on any sort of formula yet. It's something that I'm still actively practicing. I think for a while when I first started facilitating, I was so excited. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like a place where I can be vulnerable, and I kind of let it go free. And yeah, I lost a lot of influence in those days. And I got to a point where I completely reined it back in, and I was like, nope, I'm a facilitator, and that is who I will be.
Got to be quote unquote professional,
Exactly.
business-like, blah, 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 whatever we think.
Yeah. And I did that for many years. And I feel like I'm now going back and sort of bringing my vulnerability back online, so that I can sort of integrate it into my work. And, I will say that I try to tread lightly. I think the other piece of it is really recognizing that in a group, when I am a facilitator, anything that I say or do, the impact of that is going to be amplified at least 10 times. Again, because of the power dynamic. So I think that is one thing that I have been trying to keep in mind, even in my own vulnerability. Like if I drop something that's pretty vulnerable, the impact is going to land even harder because of who I am in the group. So I think that question helps to calibrate a little bit. So knowing that a little bit goes a long way, given the role that we hold in the group.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it, that magnification. I don't know if I've really thought about it that way before, but you're right. It's a very powerful position we have, and we have to think wisely, consciously about how to wield that, or if.
It can feel a little weird, and honestly, sometimes for me, it feels a little icky to like own that.
Yeah. Oh, well, for sure. Yeah, I've definitely talked about that before. It's like you kind of don't want to have that in some
Don't,
respects.
but
Yeah.
denying it makes it worse, right? I think acknowledging it and even naming it sometimes in the group can be helpful.
Have you had a lot of those experiences where you do like the elephant in the room sort of thing, like where you have to say, is this what everyone sees is going on here? Or do you have a lot of those moments in your work as you kind of try to uncover things for and with the group?
I do. I tend to have a lot of them. And then, as we were just talking about it, I'll say the thing, and then I'll also say, like, I recognize my place in the room. And I know that that has the potential to hold a lot of weight. And I'm only one person. So I'd love to hear what you all think. But usually, as soon as you say the thing, if it's real, everybody's like, oh my God, thank you for saying that.
You can feel it viscerally, I think, sometimes, right?
Exhale,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think is the hardest part for participants when they come to any kind of a session where you're facilitating as a conscious leader? Because not everybody does. And this is a different kind of session or different kind of meeting, workshop, whatever it is. What is the hard part for people? Or I guess I should say, is there? I'm assuming there is a hard part from doing it differently.
I think it's the same thing for all of us. It's the unknown of not knowing what's going to come up, not knowing sometimes, we have these ideas of how we want to be vulnerable and how we don't. And then we sort of step in it. So fear of that and fear of leaving a session or leaving a group, not knowing what your impact was when you're questioning it yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of an unconscious fear that a lot of people have going into groups like that, right? And as a facilitator, one of the things that I try to do is when somebody does something like that in a group is to be like, hey, what's going on for you? Do you want to check to see what your impact was in the group? It can tear down a lot of mental models when we do that.
That's a good question. So you literally turn it to the person and say, okay, yeah, do you want to check if you're whatever you just said or whatever just happened? Let's check the impact with the rest of the group. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And have you ever been totally surprised or just goes sideways or whatever?
I mean, there's been times, I think it depends on the size of the group. And as a facilitator, you've got to check that, right? Like if you're doing a moderation between two people and you know that the other person's not going to think very well of it, you might not want to do that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you've got to kind of hold that gently. But I think in a larger group, I mean, chances are you're going to get a lot of different perspectives. But I think that's the beauty of it, to say, like, you think that you know the impact of how you just landed. And look how many different versions there are.
Yeah. We only see the world through our rose-colored glasses sort of view, right? Our own experience.
I think that's the beauty of that sort of experience, is to recognize, like, wow, there's so much more than I can see
Yeah.
in this moment.
Oh, powerful. I can see it being really transformational, that kind, if handled carefully. I mean, I'll ask you next, I think, about how do you build trust in the room so that you are able to do that, because it could easily go sideways if people aren't ready, get scared, fearful, anxious, blah, blah, blah. How do you build up to this kind of conscious conversation?
I think one of the things that I do when I enter any room is I give people permission to tell me no, So letting people know, like, you're in charge. And if I ask you to do something and you don't want to do it, I am more than happy to hear no. Like, I actually kind of get excited. I'm like, yeah, you have some boundaries. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Gold star for you.
Yeah. So I think that's the first thing. And then beyond that is just trying to be really, like, not overly so, but engaging with my own vulnerability so that people can see, like, I'm not trying to be perfect in my own facilitation and my own speech and my own thoughts. I can speak off the cuff as well. And I think that says a lot. And to name some of the unknown in the room too can also be like really helpful, I think. I'm giving this example because it was just a workshop that I delivered yesterday, but with these students, they were going through and practicing sort of self-compassion with each other. And they were going through Kristen Neff's 3 steps of self-compassion. And as they did that, the last step is to give the person some gentle kindness. And, these are students, right? So some of them were like, you're awesome, man. Like, you're the best. And I could see the other person's face, and it was kind of like, it was like falling a little bit. So I said, I'm like, when you give this person feedback around how their words landed on you, be honest, right? Empty platitudes don't feel great. And so I think when you've given someone a formula or something that you're trying to get them to practice and it's not working, to be able to name that too builds a lot of trust. So I think it's really just honesty, and full honesty, and recognizing, like, even your best laid plans are going to fall short at some point.
Yeah, we can't be everything to every group, and we do make mistakes. So it's the best facilitators that I've talked to that they go, well, that didn't land. How can we get past this? Or what suggestions do you have, group, for how we move forward, or whatever the thing is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, what's the big deal in doing that? Like, it's not as scary as people think, right? Like, or I mean, I've never found it too scary because I'm very similar. It's like, oops, I screwed up, ha ha ha. Like, I basically probably make a small mistake every single time I facilitate, right? Whether I tell the group about it or not. And sometimes I've made big mistakes and I don't really tend to worry about that. But maybe I've grown and I forget how I grew towards that. Like for the people out there that are going, oh, this is really scary to name the mistake in front of the group, or what is it that they can tell themselves about the impact of that, or like what's the big deal about doing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it goes back to your first question, right? How do you build safety in the room? People don't necessarily want to work with someone who's perfect.
Yeah.
Like that's intimidating and not really fun. So I think your imperfections can actually be really beautiful and sort of what the group needs for permission for their imperfections to come out and for them to be honest and be themselves. So I think it's a huge asset to be able to do that.
I think of our role sometimes as, I don't know, I don't really think of the term catalyst, but it's coming up to me now. Like we're doing something in the room with these groups. And my goal is kind of like back of my mind that we're helping them learn some things that they can take back to their organization, take back to their team, like all these great things that we've done in the room, you can do it
Yes.
yourselves in the workplace or wherever the scene is, like, do you think of it that way, that we have like the ripple effect, I suppose that's a better way. I don't like catalyst. I kind of like this ripple
Yeah.
effect to
Yeah.
go back. Yeah.
Totally. And I think, as we facilitate, there's some people in the room who really get it, other people who leave still skeptical, and other people who are like, I have no idea what I just experienced, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
your hope is exactly that they go back to the organization, the people who really got it, start to practice it, and it's that ripple effect. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Maybe the penny drops for somebody much later and they think back to your session and go, oh, that's what she was trying to do, or this was what was happening, I didn't get it at the time, or how powerful it was, or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that I love as a facilitator is you're getting to strengthen other leaders, right? And so it's like you get to sort of pour into some leaders and then they get to pour into others and pour into others and pour into others. And so that is exactly that, right? That ripple effect.
How did you come to this? I mean, did you learn it in your education? Did you just read scads and scads of wonderful self-help material? Like, what was your journey like to learn these skills that you're now using as a facilitator?
I wish I could say I have a degree in organizational development. I do not.
Neither do I. But we do a lot of this work anyway, right? We kind of come to facilitation from all sorts of different angles.
We do. We do. Yeah. So my background is in healthcare administration. And I had an MBA and I was working in a large healthcare organization in the finance department, which for anyone out there who really knows me is hilarious because that is not who I am. But I was tasked with this program, and this was like 20 years ago, where we were benchmarking all of the different departments within the hospital based on their peers within similar organizations across the country. And my job in finance was to go out to all of these departments to give them their numbers and tell them the financial impact of their scores. And as I did that, I started just sort of naturally talking to them, like actually, if you worked with your team in this way, you might be able to up your number in this way. Right? I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just trying to be helpful. Right. And as I was doing that, there was someone from a large healthcare think tank out in Washington, D.C., who had come out to the hospital to do some consulting work. And they saw what I was doing and they're like, oh, you should be working in leadership development. I'm like, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. I'm just kind of doing my job the way I thought people would do it. Yeah.
Right. And so I ended up getting recruited to work on physician leadership development in Washington, D.C., which was a lot of fun. Again, for me, I think being able to tell the truth is sort of the core of leadership, not just being able to tell the truth, maybe, but being able to hold the truth in the way that the group can digest it, or the room can digest it. That sounds really simple, but I think at the core of it, that's like my take on leadership. And so I had a lot of fun developing that. And then, yeah, over the years, I'm definitely a self-help junkie. Love to read all of the books and listen to all of the things. And so have educated myself along the way. And, fast forward a couple of years, ended up working at another healthcare organization here in California. Was lucky enough to have a mentor who introduced me to the Stanford program for facilitators. And I learned so much through that program, because there's a whole training involved in order to become a facilitator for that program at Stanford.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And so going through that program was great. And then beyond that, just, starting to expand my own expertise in terms of delivering workshops and, finding the areas that really spoke to me or where I was seeing gaps in leadership and starting to offer, whether it's leadership retreats or trainings or things like that, various organizations. And then again, like sort of leaning on my own life story. I think when I look back on my own life, it's like, the truth is right there. It's right there. And yet we're also scared to say it. And then when we do say it, there's someone there who's scared and will shut you down sometimes, as a child. At least that was my experience. And so regaining that courage to be able to speak up and regaining sort of the embodiment to speak up. And what I mean by that is, again, sort of that soothing, that ability to self-soothe and have self-compassion, even as we fall and we make these mistakes, so that we have enough energy to get back up and try again. It took years. And I think that we're in a world that is absolutely insane right now. I think there's so much threat, but at the same time, there's so much opportunity right now. It's interesting, right? Like, I think even on the spectrum of emotions, like, we can only experience the level of joy that is proportionate to the level of sadness that we're able to experience.
Wow. It's sort of like a above the line and below the line kind of thing going on. That's an interesting and kind of scary comment in these times. Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Gosh, Chanchal, makes me, where do we go from here in terms of the world we're living in, right? We need these skills for facilitators. I mean, leaders, we're talking about facilitators today. Everyone needs these, all types of leaders at any level, don't they? But we're talking about facilitators. But to have these conversations with ourselves about how we do our work and bring it into the room. I'm curious, like with the Stanford training that you got, were you trained to be this way from them? Or is it something that you brought to them too? Like, there's sort of the interplay between you were trained to facilitate these groups, but you also had your own experience and, learning and expertise from other areas too. Like, has it been of a give and take to come to this way that you facilitate these groups particularly? Or like, have you pushed the envelope a little bit too from the way you were trained?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there's a lot of fear right now. I mean, I think especially since COVID, people are very, very timid and scared to interact with each other in vulnerable ways. So yeah, I definitely think that I've pushed the envelope and continue to push the envelope in many ways. Yeah. I mean, it's such a fine balance, right? Between protecting ourselves professionally and being who we want to be and making the impact we want to make in the world. I
think you have a harder challenge in your country than mine, but my country is slightly at risk, I think, too, with this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like here in Canada, you're in US, like there's been a lot that has happened this year. And so I see some of the professionals I've talked to, right, going, okay, what do we do to have the conversations we want to have in this climate? I mean, we don't want to get too political, I suppose, but we see it happening right down there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it goes back to those skills as a facilitator of how do you hold what needs to be said in a room in a way that the room can hold it.
And hear it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Hear it and hold it, right? Like when people can't hold it, it's almost as if you're invisible, right? When you say something. So I think knowing how to change our language a little bit so that people aren't getting triggered. It's so interesting because across the US, I deal with people on both sides of the aisle. There is not as much difference as people want to make it out to be. Really isn't. And it's just a matter of being able to use language that doesn't trigger one side, which is really sad that it's gotten to that point. But that's what I'm seeing. Like, that's really all it is.
Yeah. I had this conversation with Dr. Suzanne Wertheim too. She wrote the Inclusive Language Field Guide. Ooh. And I think we maybe touched on the same thing, or she had it in the book, and just like, how do we talk with people so that they can here? Like you'd use maybe different language with one person than you would with another or whatever, because it's sort of easier entry or
Yeah.
yeah, not as inflammatory or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to gauge that because things are changing so quickly, you know? So it does feel a little bit like a minefield, right?
Yeah. But brave work
Yeah.
that you're doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so you decide to write a book to share with others. I mean, tell me a little bit about that and just why you did it, but also how do people go through some of the learnings and the work that you've done? And maybe they're not going to write a book, but are there other things that they can do to kind of dive into their own journey so that they can be more of a conscious leader or conscious facilitator? You know, like I write books, like everyone knows if they listen to the podcast, you've written this book. Like, what did it do for you, and what could something like that or another type of thing do for someone else if they go through this journey?
I started writing the book almost 6 years ago. And when it started, I didn't start writing because I was like, oh, I'm going to write a book. I started writing just as a way to sort of my own therapy, honestly, just to get sort of my inner experience out onto paper. And the other piece of it was I was watching my children, looking at my whole family. I have a whole maternal lineage that I have watched stay silent and not be able to acknowledge their own existence. And I did not want that for my children, both for my son and my daughter. I wanted them to have an example of something different. So that was originally why I started writing. And then over time, I'm a facilitator, I'm also an executive coach. A lot of women of color, a lot of daughters of immigrants tend to gravitate towards my work. And so I work with a lot of them. And what I was seeing was the same narratives that I was having to overcome in my own story around spiritual and sexual abuse and these really sort of traumatic things were the same things that these women were grappling with in the C-suite. It was not different. So when I saw that, I said, I don't know that there's enough stories connecting this. And so I want to put it out there. And so that's why I wrote the book. That's why I put it out. Sometimes what happens is that we get to these higher levels of leadership, whether it's C-suite or whatever. There's this feeling that we're not legitimate or credible if we admit that we're still dealing with some of these issues.
Wow, that's a telling statement, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think what people can do, if any of this is resonating, is to check that and know that you're not alone. We're all dealing with the same crap.
Yeah. We always think everyone else has figured out everything.
Right.
Yeah. And we've had those conversations with people, haven't we? Where they go, oh, she's figured it out. He's figured it out. They don't have any of these thoughts that I have. Yeah, they do.
What they do.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think the more of us who are willing to admit that and say it out loud and almost with some pride, like, yeah, I'm still dealing with this. I'm human. It's never ending. And I think the more of us who can do that and we can start to normalize these struggles, get to a point where they're no longer a struggle.
And they don't disappear. I don't know. I was doing because I've had this imbalance syndrome. I told you about it. I've not talked about it too much because it's like, how do you talk about this on social media? But I learned this bit about anxiety, particularly. That's like, or fear and anxiety. It's like, we're never going to get rid of the feeling of fear, for example. I think it was fear that the person was talking about when I learned. But we can learn how to talk to it and be like, I see you there,
Yeah.
I thank you for the information, but I'm actually just sitting here in my living room and I'm okay. I'm safe here or whatever. Right. And just so these feelings, these emotions will come up and then we go, okay, I see you there. We engage the prefrontal cortex and go, yeah, I kind of step outside I can be more conscious, if we use that word again, about what's happening in my body or blah, 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 right? I could go on and I won't. But yeah, this is some of the most powerful learning I think I've done in my life about dealing with some of these emotions, right? Yeah, that everyone has.
Yes, everyone has. Yeah. Everyone has.
In different ways, for different reasons.
It's groundbreaking in a way, right? Like, how do you befriend your fear?
Yeah.
It's really beautiful in many ways. I think there's fear in embracing some of these things.
Yeah. So if we can do it for ourselves, does it get easier helping our groups to do it? Maybe. We hope so.
Yeah.
With some of the inner work that we do as facilitators to be able to do the external work with groups.
Yeah. I think doing that inner work and then talking about the inner work. normalizing that inner work. Again, people realize that they're not alone. I think the more people realize that they're not alone, the more they're willing to talk about it. I think that's the thing that I'm hoping to do with the book or with any of that, is just to normalize some of these things. Like, this is the state of the world. When we sit there and we deny it, we're perpetuating it.
Do you co-facilitate with others? Because it makes me think of conversations co-facilitators should have with each other, not just about, oh, well, let's get the agenda, or let's get the lesson plan down, blah, blah, blah. Like, let's talk about the fears, the anxieties, the whatever.
Yes. I love working with co-facilitators, and especially in the T group setting, because the conversations we always have to have before we get into a T group is, okay, tell me your triggers,
Okay.
right? How do I support you through your triggers?
That's interesting.
Right? If you have feedback from me and we're in the middle of a T group, do you want me to give it to you there, or do you want me to give it to you outside the group first? Because we're modeling feedback. And so some of the most powerful co-facilitator partnerships that I've had are where we're willing to give and receive feedback real time in the group.
Yeah. In front of the group. Yeah.
So much fun.
I love that. I don't know if I've done it in the middle of a session. I've done it at the end. I've got a co-facilitator friend that we didn't come up with it. We saw other facilitators model being in the fish bowl, like talking to each other about how we thought the session went. And then we would open up to the fish, which were participants that stuck around after the end. And they would then enter the conversation about, how we thought we did, and people loved it. That kind of vulnerability of, because we'd go like, I don't think this part really landed well. What do you think? Blah, 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 and then people would come in and talk with us about it.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's incredible.
We need more. We need more.
Yes.
So we got to wrap it up somewhere. Chanchal, like how do we keep moving our colleagues in the field of facilitation to be this vulnerable and do this kind of work this way with groups?
I don't know. All I know is that I continue to try to do it myself. And I think even as facilitators, like, we're facilitating participants, but we're also facilitating other facilitators at the same time. I think when each of us keeps doing our own work, I think a facilitator, for me, at the risk of sounding woo, is such spiritual work, right? Because I don't think that facilitation lands when it's not authentic. It falls flat. So I think, the more and more we can continue to do that work and sort of uncover the layers of what it takes to be more and more real, to allow the groups that we're working with to be more and more real, the more the work grows, right?
Yeah, because you said earlier, I think the more you can show up as authentically yourself, you're giving this permission to the group.
Yeah.
To do the same.
And it's hard to, if someone's showing up authentically, it's hard to meet that person with fakeness. I'm sure people can do it, but it gets exhausting.
Yeah. Just let down the guardrails.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. It's harder for some people than it is for others, I think, though, right? It's like
for sure.
It's a process. It's a journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you think that we missed in terms of your work in conscious leadership that you want to end with?
No, I really enjoyed this conversation. I love just talking about the inner workings of facilitation. Like I said, to me, it's very spiritual work. I'm looking forward to it. And in January, I'm hoping to start some of my own groups. And so if anyone is interested, please feel free to go to my website and check it out. But yeah.
Oh, well, we'll definitely have your information in the show notes so people can find you and see what you're going to be up to from this point forward. Good luck with the book and
thank you.
Unleashing it to the world and working with all those women and beyond, right? Not just women probably that you're working with, but definitely reaching the groups that you originally intended and beyond with your work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Love the work that you're doing too. I think this is so important.
This was such a special episode and conversation that I had with Chanchal. I really want to thank her for being so honest and sharing of her experience. It was a vulnerable conversation. It felt real. I was in the conversation and I really appreciated listening back to the conversation. So I hope if you've gotten this far and you're listening to me now that you felt the same, and we'll take some or all of what Chanchal has said to us and think about how it applies to your own facilitation practice as well. As she said, it's human. I'm human. It's never ending. The work that we have to do to show up as humans in this work. A couple of the quotes that stood out to me as I listened back to this episode, Chanchal said, "Sometimes it feels silly to ask the most obvious questions, and the most obvious questions usually carry the biggest unlock." I thought, ooh, that's such a good statement. The most obvious questions usually carry the biggest unlock. So sometimes we can't be afraid to say the thing that is on our mind with the group as facilitators, because it's the thing that we can say that sometimes the group members can't say. The other thing that I'd like to bring up that she said, here's the next quote. She said, "The group that you're working with has its own intelligence, and you've got to be ready and willing to go in the direction that you need to go in rather than sticking with your plan." As a facilitator, that's probably one of the most challenging aspects. And yes, that's so true. It's something I've talked about before, so many of us have talked about it, but just it always bears repeating that the group has its own intelligence. And as much as we can plan for whether it's a workshop or a meeting, whatever it is that we're facilitating, we have to be able to go in the direction that the group needs to go, at least some or most of the time, especially if it's what they need and what we haven't prepared for. We need to do it in the moment, and that is challenging. But that's the joy and the challenge and the skill that is involved in our work. I'd really like to thank Chanchal Garg again for coming on the show, having this vulnerable and real conversation with me, and I hope you enjoyed what she had to say as well. On the next episode of Facilitating on Purpose, I meet with Letitia Schulter. Letitia's going to tell us about a framework she's been working on called the Meaningful Togetherness Framework. And it's something that she's designed. Her big question, I think, we'll hear more in the episode, but I think her big question has been, how do we design for togetherness? She's got some pillars to this framework. She's going to go through what those are, talk about some work that she's been doing to put this into practice with real people. So join us next time on the show for learning about the Meaningful Togetherness Framework with Letitia Schulter. I hope you do join us then. Thank you so much for listening. You can find the show notes for all episodes at facilitatingonpurpose.ca. If you'd like to share feedback about any episode, including how I could make it more accessible for you or a tip to help me think about something in a different way, please feel free to get in touch with me. I would love to hear from you. And as always, I would love to thank Mary Chan at Organized Sound Productions for the great editing that she does for every episode. Lastly, if you enjoyed the episode, please rate the show and send it to someone who you think might be able to use the episode. The more you share, the more exposure I get for the show, which helps me reach more people, and it makes it worth it to do this podcast for you. I love doing it, and I also want to make it worth my effort and my while as well. So thanks again to all of you who keep listening to the episodes every year. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.